Hello, and once again, welcome to the world of Yakuza, where men are men, where they fight manly battles, fist to handgun, and then they hug it out after they took their shirts off like real men would. Today we are back with the I refuse to call this series Like a Dragon show. We are on our third installment, and I'm going to talk about Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, or how I, stubborn as a mule, like to call it Yakuza 8. I mean, just turn an 8 sideways and you get the logo for this game. This was done absolutely on purpose. It's even called Ryuga Gotoku 8 in Japan. Even the icon for the game is just an 8. I swear I'm not crazy. Yakuza 8 is the latest in the series. For the uninitiated, Yakuza was a 3D brawler about the Yakuza. It is known worldwide mostly for 3 reasons. 1. The absolutely brutal fisticuffs and spectacular fight choreography. 2. Its absolutely bonkers and overly complex plotlines, often involving absurd twists and turns, and tiger punching. And 3. Its absolutely masterfully crafted environments that are so accurate to the Japanese cities it is trying to portray. It is often praised as one of the, if not the strongest example of virtual tourism in video games. The previous mainline game in the series kept the later 2 points, but traded the former from a brutal 3D brawler into a turn-based style JRPG system, which, from an outsider's perspective, must have looked incredibly weird, considering how fans of gaming franchises react to small changes in their favorite franchises. You would have expected everybody to be screaming bloody murder at every chance they got. However, instead people were mostly amused by this turn of events. In part due to the fact that, we also got the Judgment franchise that might or might not continue keeping the 3D brawler style alive, and that aside from the combat system, Yakuza has basically always been a JRPG franchise from inception. You walk around, go to shops to buy healing items and equipment, and while you're doing so, you run into random battles with assholes on the street. It has always been a JRPG from day one, and if you need a detailed overview on how that change went, maybe not that detailed, but I did do a review on the previous game on this very channel, and if you want, you should check it out. You might also want to check that video out instead of this one, because I'm just going to warn you newcomers right away. This video will contain spoilers for Yakuza 7. I'm not going to consciously go deep into the storyline, but I'm also not going to watch myself constantly while I write this review in order to keep you unspoiled either, so casual spoilers abound. The reason for that being, 8 is pretty much a direct sequel to 7 that takes into account all of the events that happen in 7 and even further back in the franchise. Playing this game will spoil basically every game that came before it, and while 7 tried to make references to the previous games as minimal as possible in order for it to serve as an entry point to newcomers, 8 flies in the opposite direction, requiring you to have played the entire franchise thus far to get the most out of it. Thus, I must recommend you to not start with this game. Of course, plenty of people already ignored me because this is like one of the best selling games in the franchise. It has already sold 1 million copies, but still not a very good idea. And if the story already makes it kind of a bad idea, but you might not want to start with this one also because of the combat system, because every single issue that I had with the combat system from the previous game has been addressed, making this one of the best JRPG combat systems I ever experienced. Hell, this is not even the traditional characters in a role JRPG system. Let's just say this is one of the best RPG combat systems I have experienced, period. Meaning, even if you want to play this one first and go backwards, doing so after this one will be immensely painful, as the combat system of the previous game will not have all of the little tweaks that make a massive difference. Well, enough disclaimers. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about what Ichiban Kasuga, our hero protagonist, has been doing since the end of Yakuza 7. At the end of the previous game, the Yakuza as we knew it over the series is over, with the 2 major factions behind most of the underworld deciding to dissolve themselves in an event that became fittingly known as the Great Dissolution. So, after helping with that, Ichiban decided to go work at Hello Work, An employment agency, god, there are so many repeating words in this introduction. An employment agency in order to help as many former Yakuza as possible to reintegrate into society. The entire prologue is a pretty charming, short adventure that works almost like a pilot for an episodic series, showcasing how Ichiban helps a former Yakuza reform himself and gets him a job so he can rejoin society. The rest of the introduction though is about Ichiban hanging out with his friends. He goes on a date, he screws it up, and it basically shows that no matter how dramatic the events of the previous game were, life goes on in the Yakuza universe. At least, until he suddenly gets fired. The reason for that? Because he ended up crossing paths with the scum of the earth, the worst plague of the information era. A VTuber. And not just any VTuber, but a cow-out drama VTuber who used out-of-context clips from him in order to sell to people that he is an evil mastermind that is using former Yakuza as his crime minions. To make matters worse, he learns these news as he is getting jumped by the second worst group of people ever, live streamers, who are looking to beat him up for some extra views. My man got called out by an anime girl and then had to fight Johnny Somali on the same day. Shit's rough. Though seriously, I do have to congratulate the developers on even getting the VTuber some custom colored subs to make it look like it's a VTuber clip. Very cool. At the same time, however, the Seiryu clan, the largest remaining Yakuza clan, is calling out for every stray Yakuza out there to join and work under their banner. Since all of his friends got fired after the call-out video, Ichiban and company decide to do the reasonable thing and break into their offices. There, they meet Ebina, a new temporary head for the Seiryu clan, who is trying to gather our remaining Yakuza under him in order to perform a second Great Dissolution. More importantly though, he also meets Joe Sawashiro once again, a character from 7 who used to be his boss. So, taking advantage of this meeting, he gives Ichiban a surprising new piece of information. While Ichiban's father was killed during the events of the previous game, his mother, who was thought to have died decades ago, is actually still alive and residing in Hawaii. So he gives Ichiban a mission to go meet her for the first time in his life. And off he goes to the main setting of the game, Honolulu in Hawaii. And I get it, at this point you're probably like, man, did I accidentally click in a plot summary video? Are you just going to do a plot summary of the entire game? Well, buckle up buckaroo, because this is basically just the setup. The real story is yet to begin. That entire opening chapter took 5 hours. It took 5 hours to get to the game's actual main setting. And I hope you don't get too spooked when I say that it took 15 hours before the game even unlocked the job system for switching character classes. Yakuza 8's pacing is glacial. It is in no hurry to go anywhere fast. And if you're the kind of person who needs every single action and event to move the main plot forward, this game will definitely test the limits of your patience. On one hand, I am the kind of person who prefers a story to be short and sweet rather than too long, you know, all killer, no filler, lest it runs the risk of being overly bloated. When I'm playing a video game, it's not just a matter of if the game overall in the end was 10 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, it's about how much of the game is 10 out of 10 and how much of it is 1 out of 10. How much of it is enjoyable and how much of it is busy work. How much of it is completely unremarkable. Because most games, especially long ones, are very uneven in quality across different segments. Thankfully, Yakuza 8 is mostly fantastic all the way through. This sort of pacing really allows for the writers to treat this new epic conspiracy plot as if it was a leisurely vacation, but most importantly, it gives the story room to breathe, and for every plot point and character thread to be followed upon and utilized to their full potential. That's assuming, of course, that this room is utilized properly. Whether or not it is to utilize to actually bring out the full potential of every plot thread is another story entirely, more on that later, but for the most part it works. We get a cast of colorful characters, especially villains this time around, from the small-time Japanese gang led by Yutaka Yamai, a dark, brooding gangster who is constantly wearing a coat even in Hawaii because he simply feels too cold. To Dwight, the Spanish-dealing leader of the cartel-inspired gang, the Barracudas, played by Danny Trejo, who, of course, is always cool, who decides on his very first on-screen appearance to give us a speech about how the colonization of Hawaii and the destruction of its natural resources and culture brought about by the tourism industry created a fake paradise. A speech only rivaled by another speech by the leader of the Chinese Gunzi Mafia, Wan To, who is played by the one and only Johnny Gat himself, Daniel Day Kim. His speech is about how immigrants work their fingers to the bone for the sake of a shot at enjoying old-school American macho culture, but now they have lost their chance of it when the woke movement tore everything down, so he is now selling the classic American dream inside of a secret casino that exists in the hidden floor 7.5 of a luxury hotel. The previous game in the series was no stranger to social commentary, but Yakuza 8 really goes all out, now that it has a chance to also take potshots at American culture, which is just delightful, especially when it comes out of the mouth of such a colorful cast of characters. The main playable cast that are not the protagonist takes a bit more of a backseat to the antagonists this time around. There are 2 new main playable characters who get their own emotional character arcs that are very good, but most of them are returning characters who already had their character arcs wrapped up in the previous game, so while their addition and return is very nice, and they do have their own little side stories as well, which are very cool as always, they just can't compare to the characters who actually get a lot of the plot focus. The main exception being the man himself, the protagonist of the previous games, Kazuma Kiryu, who is back for one last round for what, the 4th, 5th time in this franchise? His presence is very much welcome here though, as he essentially shares the protagonist title with Ichiban and is part of a crucial effort to perform a passing of the torch for the new protagonist. This is where things get weird though, because didn't he already pass the torch to Ichiban in the last game? The answer is yes, he did, but he also did it in a very quick, almost cameo-like way, in order to not overwhelm newcomers too much. He had a very light presence in the last mainline game, and it doesn't help that what was supposed to be his last game, Yakuza 6, wasn't the grand finale most fans thought he deserved. It wasn't a bad game, but since it was the first game in the then recently developed Dragon engine, Ryuga Gotoku Studio clearly bit more than they could chew, like how they had to block off sections of the ever-present Kamurocho, the city that was the main setting from the very first game, because they simply didn't have the time and resources to redo it all on the new engine together with the new city, because you know, every mainline game has to have a new city. Yakuza 6 was good, but Kiryu deserved better, and Yakuza 8 is that, but also, weirdly, by dragging out the plot of the Great Dissolution into this game, Yakuza 8 is also a little bit of a redo of the plot of Yakuza 7, mostly a redo of the parts relevant to the end of the classic era and the passing of the torch to the new Yakuza Last World. So 8 ends up trying to be both what 6 and 7 were trying to be, even though those games didn't really fail at their tasks and they are still very much canon. Their plots are still relevant to this one, they happen, it's canon, so maybe it's kind of a we can do it again but better situation. Maybe? I can't say what the thought process was behind this decision, I can't even begin to guess. Suffice it to say, if this really is Kiryu's last game, for realsies this time, then it is a very much deserved final adventure, and the passing of the torch could not be stronger. At the very final chapter, Kiryu even says that he will deal with the problems of the Yakuza from the past, while Ichiban will light a way into the future. The writer's intent could not be more blatant in that regard, and in that sense, it works. All of the emotional high notes that you expect to hit wonderfully. Ichiban and his familial issues with his mom, Kiryu dealing with his past, it all works out about as well as it could. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for all of the plot of the game. The game is mostly divided, much like its protagonist, in 2 halves. There is stuff going down in Hawaii and there is stuff going down in Japan. But unfortunately, the stuff going down in Japan is a lot more interesting. You get to fight 4 different crime syndicates in Hawaii, and they are basically the new clan equivalent. 2 of them end up being just filler, with the last of them lacking any real depth, They're all thematically interesting, but ultimately empty. The Japan side, on the other hand, has a really thought out conspiracy with interesting characters that have interesting motivations that are, unsurprisingly, deeply tied with the actions of the protagonists of the previous games. Unsurprisingly because, well, those games all took place in Japan, so of course it would be easier to build new Japanese characters around those actions. This is always, of course, just like the rest of this review, just like the rest of all my reviews, just my opinion, so I could easily see some people thinking that the Hawaiian sections are better, the Hawaiian plot is better, because they are not more of the same. The reason the Japanese storyline works so well after all is because the developers have been building up Japanese conspiracies for 10 games in a row at this point, if you count Gaiden and Zero, so obviously it's their area of expertise, but I can also see people being like, well, we already got 10 games in a row of Japanese conspiracies, so it's not that different from the usual stuff and the Hawaiian stuff is more interesting. A point that I just can't get over, though, is the complete waste of some of the characters. Wanto, for example, does basically nothing for the rest of the plot shortly after his introduction. He doesn't even have recorded voice lines when he speaks past the chapter he first appears, leading me to believe it was maybe a scheduling issue since he's played by Daniel Day-Ken and he probably has a busy schedule, except he's only modeled after Daniel and has in fact a completely different voice actor in both English and the Japanese dub, so what gives Ryuga Gotoku Studio? Why is he completely irrelevant after his introduction? In a faster paced game, I wouldn't have noticed that, but in such a long, elaborate one that has all the time in the world to tie all of its loose ends, every single loose end left feels very annoying. Like, why did we waste a chapter going back and forth between places with little plot progression instead of further developing this character? I wouldn't have a problem if we didn't develop this character. Why is he here? Let's just develop this character instead of wasting our time. And it's a real shame because the plot's loose ends are by far the weakest part of the game. Without them, the rest of the problems are nitpicky at best. It's a shame I can't recommend this story over 7's story. That one was just as crazy, but I feel like that one hit all of the nails it had to right in the head, and the struggle between the factions of Ichinjo's Grey Zone and said gangs by themselves felt a lot more fully realized than the machinations of Honolulu's gangs. But thankfully, the passing of the torch storyline and the emotional moments still all work pretty well, and when the most damning criticism that I could have is that the plot has some glaring flaws in it, but still overall pretty good, well, that says everything you need to know about how good the rest of the game is, which is to say, it's practically perfect. So let's get talking about the gameplay. Yakuza 8 continues the turn-based classic JRPG style introduced in the previous mainline game, and I'm happy to say every single problem I had with the combat system in the previous game has been completely fixed. As you can see, the base system is a very classic attack, block, skill, run away or use items, with the added wrinkle that during combat you can press buttons with precise timing to increase damage or block attacks. These mechanics should be well known for anybody who ever played a game like this before, but if you haven't, I recommend Paper Mario. It's a really good game and the Thousand Year Door is getting a remaster soon, I think. I don't think it has a release date yet, but you should check that one out, it's a really good game. The problem that I had with this system in the previous game is that this was all that the game had, and while a simple system is not necessarily a bad one, what made it really kind of plain was that everything around it was at odds with this system at all times. The gameplay might have been turn-based, but the battle still took place in the Yakuza-style brawler world that was made for brawling. Characters moved back and forth and made it hard to figure out how many enemies would be hit by area of effect attacks, not to mention some of the mechanics that would carry over from earlier titles, like the ability to use nearby objects to attack enemies, were made completely useless due to the fact that you had zero control over your position in the first place. You could really feel the developers struggling to translate the Yakuza setting into a meaningful battle system, so, you know, they could be a turn-based JRPG, but the series still wouldn't lose its original flavor. Well, the good news is, that's been completely fixed in 8 by simply allowing your character a degree of movement on their turn. They can't reposition themselves completely all over the map, but they have a small circle in which they can move, and when you go near an object, the game indicates that you are about to turn your normal attack into an object attack. Same if you're near a character and you can do a combo, and you can even sneak behind enemies if they are focused on another character in order to deal massive damage that ignores blocking with a back attack. All of the skills now all have very clearly defined area of effects of all of different kinds, and the game encourages you to use them to cause maximum damage to as many enemies as possible. Many attacks will also throw enemies back, and if you throw them towards an ally, there is a chance that they will follow up with an attack of their own for extra damage. Basically, positioning was completely revamped, well, more like it was added since it didn't exist in the first place, but it was added and it is great, and the number of combat options that have been opened are fantastic. But if you're a dum-dum like me, don't worry, because the game hasn't become some kind of big brain grand strategy either. So, you know, don't open it up like you're starting a new game of Crusader Kings. The combat possibilities have been opened up, but you'll still be able to make snap decisions based on the situation. If the enemies are suspiciously lining up, then you can move your character so you can line them up yourself, and then you hit multiple enemies with a line attack. Enemies can also block your attacks, so you need to use a grapple skill to break their guard. Are there many enemies around the enemy that you need to grapple? Some characters have skills, some jobs have skills that have you grapple an enemy and then deal a massive area of effect damage. Use that one to hit the extra enemies. The game also has the classic enemies are weak to certain types of attack or they are resistant to other types of attack, so that helps whittle down the best options available. But depending on the jobs that you have equipped and your skills, your options will change. Sometimes your character is low in health, so why not use a health stealing skill instead of your most powerful one in order to keep them alive? Basically, there is never just one good path, but it's not like there's 300 possible ones to confuse you either. The system adds just enough complexity to keep your brain engaged with it, but not enough to overwhelm you. It hits, in my opinion, the perfect balance between complexity and simplicity. It is the kind of combat system that I really want from a game that will throw over 1,000 battles of you before you hit the credits. It's perfection. And while we're on the topic of having to make choices depending on your current jobs and skills, jobs are back. Coming back from 7, allowing all playable characters to completely change their skills and stats at the drop of a hat. Well, not exactly. While in the previous game, Ichiban changed jobs by literally changing jobs at Hello Work, this time around he must have the proper personality traits and pay a small fee to do a tour instead in Hawaii. Every tour inspiring him or another character to do some cool stuff, which then unlocks a new job. However, in the previous game, there was little chance for synergy between jobs. Leveling up a job would simply unlock 2 of the job skills for you to use across other jobs, many of which were just not very good. You had no choice. You just had to use the skills that the game developers decided would be best between jobs, but this time around, you can equip any skill you unlock in a job while you're using any other job, allowing for some truly deliciously broken combinations. This is what a really good job system looks like, and I love how they took notes and improved it from the previous game. You can't just equip every skill on every character immediately though. There is a limited number of slots based on Ichiban's bond level with each character, which serves as a nice little segue into talking about bonds. Ichiban isn't just going at it alone after all. He always has the support of his friends, and this time around, Kiryu has their support as well. And by walking around Hawaii, you can trigger all sorts of hilarious party banter, which all raise the bond level of the characters involved. But the real good ones are the ones that slowly fill out a personality bingo card, and you get them by triggering conversations that slowly reveal the personality traits of each character. And then when you fill a whole column or a row, bang, that's a bingo, and you get extra bond points for that. Once your bond has leveled up enough, basically once every 10 levels, you unlock a drink link, a short cutscene in which Ichiban drinks away with his buddies and tries to understand and connect with their troubles. Persona has things hanging out around mouths, but this is the real adult stuff. getting shit-faced and complaining you're anxious about things you don't think you can change. I'm not sure if that's mentally healthy actually to do that, but thankfully Ichiban has a heart of gold, so by the end of each character story, he is sure to help them reach a happy ending. You'll need to reach the end of the links for that though, but each drink link isn't just a narrative reward, but a gameplay one as well, as each tier that you complete unlocks a new level of support from that character, from special tag team attacks to an increased chance that they will strike downed enemies with a follow-up attack. So drink up as often as you can. I don't think that's healthy advice either. Drink links are also one of the ways in which Ichiban can increase his personality stats. During drink links you can make a choice, and depending on your choice you will increase a specific stat. Those stats come with passive bonuses like poison resistance and stuff, but more importantly, they are necessary for you to unlock the different jobs. And while bond levels are the thing that unlock extra skill slots for most of the crew, Ichiban unlocks new slots based on his personality, so he better get to work on self-improvement. The other options you get to increase those passive stats are through doing tests at the vocational school, like a nerd, or doing the way cooler thing of befriending everybody in Hawaii, courtesy of a brand new social network called Aloha Links, which is introduced to Ichiban by the one, the only, Kei. It's her! Kei! From the famous video game Like a Dragon Gaiden, remember her? She's back, and she's in-game now. What an upgrade, what a glow-up, wow, how did she end up in Hawaii in the first place? Oh well, the important thing is, Ichiban can just say aloha to a bunch of random people spread all across Honolulu and instantly become friends with them, unlike in Japan, where you have to beat up a random thug to become friends first. Though you can do that in Hawaii as well if someone needs it, there are random thugs harassing people there as well. There's not much to this system. Some people will only become friends if you give them gifts or if you buy stuff from their store first, and you can become friends with animals by giving them food. It's simple, it's cute, and it had me running into enemy encounters just to stop and say hi to a buddy. Weirdly heartwarming. Oh well, back to the combat system, because I want to talk about a couple of things that I don't like about the combat system. The only things that I don't like are the heat actions that only Kiryu can do. They are meant to be a reference to his adventures in the earlier Yakuza titles, but they are basically specific actions that can only be triggered if Kiryu and his target enemy are in very specific positions, which means it essentially redoes the same mistake the previous game did with weapon attacks, in which the positions have to be so specific. I only managed to accidentally pull off a heat action twice in the entire playthrough. I don't even have footage of it. Oh, and there's also the Pound Mates this game summons. They're not bad, it's just I kind of completely forgot they existed after they got introduced, and I kind of ended up finishing the game without them, so oops. On the flip side though, Yakuza 8 deserves some props. It gets bonus points for allowing you to use status effects on bosses, which hot damn seems to be happening more and more often these days, which good, it should. Why the hell would you not want to use status effects on the fight where status effects would matter the most? And also yes, while Ichiban gets a super attack with all of his friends when their tag team bar is full, when Kiryu's tag team bar is full, he just breaks the combat system through force of sheer will and proceeds to unleash the beatdown of a lifetime in real time. It is as incredible as it sounds. So, now that the combat has been massively improved, how has the team improved to the trademark Yakuza cities? The answer is nothing, because you can't improve upon perfection. Ijincho and Kamurocho returned from the previous Yakuza games, but the highlight is definitely Honolulu in Hawaii, the very first time a Yakuza game has taken place outside of Japan. I think, please correct me in the comments, there might be some obscure fact that I don't know or maybe I missed something, but I do think this is the very first time that we got a main setting outside of Japan. This place operates on a completely different vibe from every other city we explored so far. Sure, we did get to go to the famous, overwhelmingly decorated streets of Sotenbori, as well as the beachy seasides of Okinawa and Onomichi before, but Honolulu fuses the energy of the former to overwhelm the more sleepy, calm nature of the later cities in order to create a true tourist destination. Giant hotels in front of beautiful beaches coexist side by side with more humble suburbs lined up with small vacation homes, as well as the places where the people who work in those hotels live. There is a neighborhood that is filled with graffiti art that is beautiful. There's a small Japanese neighborhood with a shrine, because of course there is. And honestly, it's just cool hanging out around the neighborhood and taking out of the details, even when there's nothing else there. Yakuza really is the series that makes back alleys and parking lots the most interesting places in the world. And all of this is done without any fancy tricks like interior parallax mapping or anything like that. Google that if you don't know what that is. But basically every single store, whether you can enter it or not, has actual furniture and actual people in it, and it just looks stellar. The feel you get when you go from the nighttime outside, the nighttime outdoors into a store, and you just get hit with that artificial in-store lighting. And when that happened to me, I could almost feel the store air conditioning in real life. It's just, when so many games fail, even though they can't stop touting their hyper-realistic graphics, when so many games fail to deliver on the realism they say, Yakuza never fails to deliver on that. From the moment you arrive in Hawaii, you can already see not only the buildings, not only the beautiful beaches, but also the grime, the rust, and the cracks in the walls beneath the pipes that show that this is not just a place, but a lived-in place with a history of its own. It's just crazy how well Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio keeps nailing their locations, to the point people who actually live there can confirm that, yeah, it looks pretty much like that. And as a person who lives not technically near, but close enough to beaches, that I have visited many beaches in my lifetime, as if that is something super special, but just let me tell you, Yakuza 8 nails that feeling perfectly. As a person living in the southern hemisphere, it's summer here, which also makes this the perfect summertime game. And of course, like any good beach vacation, you can jump in the water and swim amongst the waves. Damn, I should go back and visit a beach sometime soon as well. Anyway, back on track. I've said this before in my previous review of a Yakuza game, and I'll say it again, if all that they got right was the environment, they still got it so right that the setting alone could carry the game, just by getting me to explore every nook and cranny. But as always, Yakuza is not just about the location, but what you can do in it, which, like in every other game in this franchise, is a lot. Of course, the classics return. You can sing karaoke at the bar, which also improves your bond level, by the way, which is very realistic. Nothing like singing together to form stronger bonds. And you can also play classic Sega arcade games like Virtua Fighter. Disclaimer, I don't actually know how to play Virtua Fighter. And of course, even in Hawaii, you can still play shogi and other Japanese board games. I think someone's going to kill me for calling them Japanese board games. Are they technically board games? Well, you can play them if you want to. I didn't want to, not shogi anyways. There are a few more elaborate activities that I did want to check out though, that are brand new to this game. And one of those is the Crazy Eats minigame, a Crazy Taxi parody in which Ichiban joins Uber Eats and delivers food while riding a bicycle. The catch? All of the food is spread all over the streets and Ichiban must collect it while doing crazy tricks when he delivers them for extra tips. There's probably a critique of the gig economy to be made here. Maybe, probably, but mostly it's just really fun. And then there's also the Mismatch app minigame, in which Ichiban does Tinder in order to find a hot date by giving the correct answers, which includes a minigame in which he desperately sends as many messages as he can in sequence when the woman is clearly uninterested in further conversation in hopes of scoring a hot date. And just don't think too much about that. Just don't think about it. It's just silly. Ichiban is a very silly guy. And of course, there are the sub-stories. Essentially side quests our protagonists can take on whenever they feel like it. There are all kinds of sub-stories, most of them involving punching someone in the face at some point. But there are also plenty of creative diversions from the main plot, like the one in which Ichiban must work as a waiter at a restaurant and thus has to memorize Hawaiian food from the menu in order to deliver each order correctly. And oh my god, is that the analog lip system? Sakura Wars mentioned. But of all of the minigames inside the versions, there are two big ones in this game. Bigger even than the more elaborate ones that I mentioned. Usually, each game has one big one, like the Ichiban Confections business management minigame from 7, though I think 7 also had Dragon Card. I think that sort of fits the bill of being very different. But this time around we get two big ones, undeniably big ones. Except, you'd expect one of them to be focused on Ichiban and the other on Kiryu, given that we got two protagonists this time around, but no. Both of them focus on Ichiban, and the first one you unlock is the Sujimon Battle League. That's right, the Sujimon are also back, and unlike in the previous game, when they were used as a Pokemon parody solely to give you a Pokédex equivalent to catalog your enemies, this time they have come back with a full, hidden, underground league centered around battling groups of them. For those not in the know, Sujimon are essentially criminal and deviants. They are not cute little critters. They are basically the people who keep harassing Yakuza protagonists game after game. And now you can throw a gift after beating them and overwhelming them by desperately asking over and over again for them to join you in order to collect them. Ichiban just really loves to desperately ask people repeatedly. Once again, don't think too hard about that, he's just a silly guy. And once you get them to join you, you get to play a completely different turn-based battle system in which you set up 2 rows of 3 Sujimon, and each turn you select one of them, only one of them, to attack your opponent's Sujimon. Which Sujimon is going to be hit by the attack depends on the position of each of them. The ones in the middle will hit our enemies, the one on the side will only hit their side, and the one in the middle. But they will always deal extra damage to the Sujimon directly in front of them. You can also switch positions. You can switch positions between the ones on the front row, as well as bring one from the back row into the front row. You can do that once per turn with no additional cost, and when your special attack gauge is sufficiently filled, you can order them to do a special attack, at which point a giant spinning wheel will come down, will show up on screen actually, where you stop on that wheel decides if your special attack hits normally, hits only one enemy, or if you're really lucky, if you really try your luck to get one of the more dangerous squares, it does critical damage to everyone. And of course, there are the type advantages to worry about as well. Yes, that's right, your Sujimon have elemental types. This entire thing is basically 1 or 2 features away from being a completely different, fully fledged game. While I did enjoy the entire comedy aspect of treating hardened criminals like Pokemon, I did enjoy that a lot, and I did enjoy the gameplay at the beginning, and I was surprised at how deep it was, with all of the switching back and forth to minimize elemental damage and to try to get in a special attack at the right time. My main problem with it was how luck-based it is to get new Sujimon. If you defeat another Sujimon trainer, you get one of their Sujimon randomly. If you go to specific spots, then you can try to enter a Sujimon raid, which is basically a normal Yakuza 8 battle with a guaranteed Sujimon of a specific type at the end. But other than the type, you have no idea if the Sujimon that will be available there is going to be any good. And the last way to get Sujimon is to just spend tickets on a straight up gacha machine. Yes, that's right, a straight up gachapon machine. You just use tickets or cash and you hope for a lucky pool on a Sujimon 10 roll. With everything else that the game has to offer, looking for the very specific Sujimon necessary to win storyline battles that you need to progress on your Sujimon career felt a little bit too luck-based for me. It just wasn't that interesting. And you will want to do that, since the maximum level of your Sujimon is directly tied to your Sujimon rank, which only levels up when you beat one of the Elite Four, or whatever they are called in this game, but they are pretty much the Elite Four. And since all that progress is tied to that, you will want to go down the Sujimon storyline. But yeah, you're gonna watch some pretty elite Sujimon, since the bosses can really wreck your stuff, especially since, you know, like I said, you have a level cap based on how many bosses you defeated. But the other minigame available, the other big minigame, well, now that one is not 1 or 2 features away from being a fully fledged game. It basically is 1 feature too many for a side excursion. Sit back, because this could be basically a review on its own. I'm going to tell you the story of how Ryuga Gotoku Studio slipped an entire, complete survival crafting game right under our noses, and that game is called Dondoko Island.
どんどこ島には楽しい遊びがいっぱい自然いっぱい夢いっぱいゴミも危険もいっぱいそれはいけませんぞ子供から大人までみんなが楽しいワンダーアイランドハッピーリゾートどんどこ島へどんどこどんどこおいでませハッピーリゾートどんどこ島
Many hours into the game, I forgot how many exactly, but not quite halfway through just yet, but still many hours into it, Ichiban goes on another wacky adventure as he is spirited away by mascots straight out of a children's educational show to Dondoko Island, a former resort that used to be a beautiful island, now completely wrecked by pirates that have started illegally dumping trash there. That's right. Actual pirates have started destroying the mascot island, so Ichiban has to beat them out and restore the island. But how does he do that? By breaking stuff up and using the materials to build better stuff, of course. So yeah, it's pretty much a survival crafting game. Except instead of your bare hands, you already start with a bat to break stuff up, a net to catch bugs, and a fishing trident, because a normal fishing rod just wasn't wacky enough. The idea with the fish and the bugs, at least at the start, is that you can sell them to make money, and you will need money to buy stuff. Not regular money, because that would be way too normal. Instead, you get paid in Dondoko bucks, which are only usable in Dondoko Island. Though, there are ways to turn that into real money as well, and wait a second. A bug net to catch bugs with... Oh my god! When you first start out though, the island has barely any space for you to build in. It's mostly a toxic wasteland filled with trash, and there are different sections of the island where trash will respawn in every single in-game day that passes. The gimmick here is that you need to pay a guy so he will clear the trash out permanently, allowing you to build stuff there, but at the start, paying him is very expensive. However, the more trash you clear, the higher the section's ranking becomes and the cheaper it will be to clean it up. However, every day only so much trash spawns there, usually only enough to rank up a single time, so it's all about patiently returning day after day, clearing up every single day until the rank is good enough for you to consider paying to permanently clear the place. And I know what you might be thinking, I can already see the gears turning in your head. You're probably thinking, wait, if all of that trash that I destroy gives out useful materials, won't clearing up a place permanently make it harder for you to get those materials? Well, fear not, because the game designers thought of a clever way to deal with that. There is a recycling center on the island, and when you clear up a section, all of the materials that would spawn there will instead instantly appear on the recycling center every day. So it's in fact even more convenient to clear up the place. So once you got all of the land that you need and all of the material as well, it's time for you to go back to your workbench where you can craft furniture. The idea here is that your goal is to restore Dondoko Island into a 5-star resort, and you can do that by restoring different areas and then leveling up 2 stats called Popularity and Satisfaction. Popularity is raised by catching different types of bugs and fish. The first time you catch them, they will add a little popularity, and then as you repeatedly catch the same one, you will get different popularity boosts at different milestones depending on how rare the animal you caught is. Some materials also count in this popularity list if they are not the common ones that you acquire by just breaking stuff. You need to find them randomly on the ground. Satisfaction, on the other hand, is increased by crafting furniture, decorations, and yes, even entire buildings on a workbench, and then placing them on the island. As Ichiban crafts more and more buildings, his craft level goes up, and the higher it goes, the more stuff he can build. This is not the only way to unlock new buildings, as you can also find blueprints across the island and even back in Hawaii as well, but most of them will be unlocked just by building what you already have. Every building is useful not just for giving you satisfaction points, but they also have their own style, from rustic to pop and even sleazy buildings. This is an important point to pay attention to when you're dealing with guests. That's right, you heard me correctly, guests. Because what is a resort without guests after all? Once you upgrade your island enough, the same guy who cleans up the terrain will start selling special guest lodging buildings, which when placed in your island will allow guests to come and visit it. Different guests will have different tastes, some of them will prefer a rustic style, others will prefer a pop style, or sleazy, or even an elegant one. So having enough buildings to satisfy them is key to keeping them happy. If you build pets in a way that connects the guests to these buildings, they will also gladly spend money on them, giving you even more Dondoko bucks. It's important to keep them satisfied, as at the lowest level of satisfaction, they will leave the island, and the happier they are, the bigger the tip they will give you when they leave normally. You can also make them happier by greeting them every day of their stay, as well as giving them souvenirs, which are crafted from the bugs and fish you caught. Yes, you don't need to just sell them, you can also use them to craft souvenirs. As you can also try setting up a campfire as a big summer night event if you have enough cash to burn on it. And that's not even getting into the Dondoko farm. Halfway through your Dondoko adventure, you unlock a second separate island where you get to visit the Dondoko farm. A place where you can put your Sujimon, yes, your Sujimon, we're going back to them, you can put them to work. You can do a variety of things like setting them up to farm vegetables, to collect materials, or you can just straight up train them to become stronger, with different options giving you different results depending on the elemental type of your Sujimon. The Sujimon you currently have in your party can also hang out in the island, and you can go there and pet them, Pokemon Amie style, in order to increase your bonds with them. Because nothing says you appreciate your pet criminal more than giving them head pets. And once all of that is done and you're back on the main island, you can also craft indoor furniture to place inside Ichiban's house, because yes, he gets his own house for you to decorate with all sorts of fancy stuff. Because we're already here, so we might as well do that. Decorating your house is not just about making it look pretty, it's also about increasing Ichiban's health, because you see, the fancier your house is, the fancier your furniture is, the more health Ichiban has. And Dondoko Island Ichiban has his own separate health bar, and if you're wondering why he needs that, we are unfortunately going to have to talk about one of the 2 points of Dondoko Island that I just couldn't enjoy. The first is the combat. The pirates can randomly attack the island, and they can also go and attack the lodgings and try to destroy the lodgings, and they also respawn every day in the sections of the island you haven't cleared up yet, so you know, they are constantly showing up, and Ichiban must defeat them using his trusty bat. But not in turn-based combat like the rest of the game, no, not in turn-based, no. This combat, only in Dondoko Island, is in real time, and it is awful. I don't know how they did that, I just don't. Yakuza has always been a real-time brawler. Their last game that was not mainline in this franchise was also a real-time brawler. They clearly have all of the talent and resources necessary to make a basic brawler. They probably have all of the assets for that ready. But in Dondoko Island, the moves are floaty and they barely connect. There is a soft lock-on that will point you towards the wrong enemy or towards a nearby pile of trash instead of the enemy you're trying to hit. And while you do get a dodge, I felt like dodging just wasted time since I would get hit while repositioning myself to get the next hit in after I dodged, so I just started mashing attacks since I got less damage that way. Seriously. The combat feels like an underwater slap fight between drunk salarymen, and I have no idea how they managed to miss so hard. And the second thing that I just couldn't get into was raising popularity. Raising satisfaction is simple enough, just build each time more elaborate furniture and place it all over the island to raise it, but popularity mostly depends on you gathering the same things over and over again. And while yes, that is part of the gameplay loop of gathering materials and crafting in general, you have little control over what bugs and fish spawn each day. They rotate throughout the days, so all you can do is check every spot and hope that the next time you catch something, you break the milestone necessary to get a little more popularity. Mix this in with the fact that rarer bugs worth more points, like beetles, can actually just fly away if you startle them, so you have to move very carefully around them, and the slow as molasses speed of your tools until you pay to upgrade them, and the game added just enough luck into the process to make it annoying without adding enough of it to make it slot machine addictive. Every time I reached a new resort ranking, the last number that I managed to get up was popularity. I hate it. I just do not like the system at all. At least you do get a little popularity boost every time you pay for a commercial, but they ain't cheap, and it's really not that much. Overall though, those 2 points aside, Dondoko Island works pretty well. It works exactly as intended. It pretty much nails what makes survival crafting games feel like crack cocaine. It's all about the constant increments of each time larger rewards you get through slowly but surely acquiring more and more random stuff that you found on the ground. It's great. It's also about being able to make everything look pretty, like I try to do. How much time you're going to spend on this game, in this side mode, is going to depend on how pretty you want to make your island. I did run into a little bit of trouble with space and lodgings and stuff because I wanted to build a mini Kamurocho of sorts on the island, gate and everything, leading into a sort of plaza that would like have all of the buildings around it so you could see as many buildings as possible. And it's all about seeing life happening around because of what you built as well. It's about the guests visiting and appreciating the decor, and I completely forgot about the rest of the game until I finished it. I easily spent about 20 plus hours on this mode alone, and you could spend even more. And while this is unfortunately not like in the previous game, this is not the best way to make money in this game, but I did come back to Hawaii completely loaded because I just refused to go back to the main story before I finished this mode, and I just had enough money to buy like the best weapons in the game from the best shop. And oh shit, yeah, the best weapons, I forgot there is an entire different game here. Okay, we should get back to that. So, now that we are back from Dondoko Island, it's about time we reached a conclusion, isn't it? Yakuza 8 is not just about infinite wealth, but about delivering a truly almost infinite amount of content that's super fun to engage with in all of its various wacky forms. It has a combat system that fixed everything from the previous game that I thought it was a little bit too plain, too simple. They got more complex, and while it is complex enough to keep you actively engaged with it, it's still simple enough that you could just go through 1,000 of its battles without getting tired. And if anything, the weakest point of this package is definitely the plot. If there are going to be any contentious opinions about this entry, they will almost definitely be about the plot, because the gameplay is perfect. It has been perfected. If you feel like you might enjoy this wild ride from this review, chances are that not only you will, but that you will absolutely not regret picking up what is arguably one of the best RPGs ever made. It is, at the end of the day, another fantastic entry in the Yakuza franchise. And the thing that worries me the most about it is just how are they going to follow up on this game? I just can't see this getting any bigger and better without developers actually just straight up dying of overwork. And it is going to be super hard to get bigger than Dondoko Island. It's going to get super hard. The thing is just straight up Animal Crossing with a side dish of Palworld. It's crazy. But hey, at least we can take comfort in knowing that if Judgment 3 happens, it's going to be a really wild international case about a Japanese citizen that he explodes in Hawaii or something. And if that happens, I definitely look forward to that. And this is where the video would normally end, but before we go, I'd like to unfortunately address the elephant in the room that is the DLC for this game. Because you see, I bought this game on pre-order. Shameful. I know, you shouldn't do that, but I bought it anyway because pre-ordering it was the only way to get 2 jobs, the linebacker and the tennis ace, without paying an additional fee for it. I thought those jobs, I don't know if they're going to be super special, I didn't know if they're just going to be an extra little thing, and in the previous game there were extra jobs in the special edition as well. This is not something new, but what got me really worried about this entire thing is that the linebacker and the tennis ace turned out to be some pretty cool classes, and I ended up using the tennis ace job all the way until the very end of the game, and thinking that such an OP and fun job is not available straight out of the gate for new players that might purchase this down the line on a sale, it's a little bit sad, even if it's nothing new. But to make matters worse, Sega has also gated New Game Plus behind the DLC purchase, and that's just indefensible. I'm not saying it's super easy to just make a new Game Plus mode. I know that there's all sorts of variables and triggers and stuff that needs to get properly resetted so the game can be played again properly without running into any bugs and problems, but also you can't just reset everything because you need to carry levels and items and stuff. Plus, you might want to get in some additional content, some extra content for that's second playthrough only. It's work okay, and it's why some games release without a New Game Plus, but then they get a New Game Plus patched in later. Game development is always work. It always takes a little bit of work at the very least, but come on. It's New Game Plus, man. It's still as basic of a feature as they come. And not only that, but there's an entire post-game dungeon called the Big Swell that's also part of this DLC, and it's only available there. And man, when your RPG's post-game is locked behind DLC, that's basically number one reason right there why you can't be the best RPG ever made, even if you do manage to be among the best, because that's just ridiculous. And then there is a boatload, and I do mean a metric boatload of character improvement DLC. DLC to instantly level up characters and jobs and everything. And while I don't think the main game is overly grinding, and trust me, I hate grinding, I would have been the first one to complain about that if it was too grindy, but it still stops you to grind a couple of levels every now and then. And just that makes this entire DLC section feel worse with every new time I take a look at it. It just feels worse. And it's not just Sega, I feel like this could be an entire mini video on its own, but something similar is happening with Capcom recently. In Devil May Cry 5, they sold orb packs as DLC, but since there is a weapon in the game that you can use to literally grind orbs more easily, that entire thing felt more like a joke. But then they started selling extra treasures and upgrade tickets for weapons, which by the way are very grindy to get in the Resident Evil 4 remake, and then they went one step further and sold skins in Street Fighter 6 that were almost the same price as the game if you bought the whole set, but you know, it's cosmetic, so it's not that bad, but okay, let's be real, that price for just cosmetics just makes the entire thing look worse. And what I'm trying to say here is that yes, big companies have been doing very bad things recently with microtransactions and stuff. AAA live service is usually garbage and stuff, so you might be wondering why am I singling out these companies that make good games, but that's exactly why I'm singling them out. It's easy to ignore expensive microtransactions when they are part of live service garbage that nobody wants to actually play. But seeing companies getting more and more comfortable putting them on otherwise completely fine video games, especially highly praised companies that seem to be on their comeback era like Sega and definitely Capcom. Capcom has been on a roll for years now, but seeing them do that, well, it worries me, and I just want to tell you this so you can make an informed decision. I purchased Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth at full price on pre-order. I can't judge anyone, and if you want to do so, that's fine. And if you want to buy the premium edition for the New Game Plus, that's fine as well. I just want you to make an informed purchase. So while the game is fantastic, and it is already very packed with content even without any DLC, if you're not comfortable with all of the DLC stuff and you want to wait a bit for a sale, maybe so you can get the complete package at a reasonable price, hey, I think that's also perfectly understandable. But please do not buy the character growth DLC. Remember, if any developer ever tries to pull off adding massive grind to sell DLC on an otherwise perfectly fine game, if nobody else got your back, Cheat Engine got your back. Use that instead. This has been a Penguin Overdrive production, and I hope to count on your continued support on the very near future.
Think I'm getting stronger.